If national power has an invisible enemy, it's compound interest. It doesn't march. It doesn't hold elections. It doesn't ask permission. It grows in silence, converting tomorrow's sweat into today's calm, turning rulers into borrowers and citizens into counterparties. When fiscal discipline cracks, every other advantage, precious metal, global colonies, or nuclear arsenals, turns into stage props on a collapsing set. The right question isn't whether collapse happens, but along which path, at what speed, and with which warning lights blinking before the lights go out. Imagine 3 vaults and 1 ledger. In Spain's vault, bullion stacked like a promise that tomorrow would always be paid in silver. In Britain's vault, gilt-edged bonds and global contracts priced in a language the world had to speak. In the Soviet vault, warheads, launch codes, and the illusion that force could substitute for productivity. In the ledger, compounding obligations whose math cares nothing for banners or anthems. 3 stories, 1 equation. Change the costumes and the flags and the slogans. Keep the arithmetic, and the ending repeats. Spain's story opens like a treasure novel. Galleons grown home with New World cargo. Mint doors swing wide. The cork glitters. Prices glitter too. Silver is a measuring stick, not a factory. A mirror, not a furnace. When money is easy, discipline is hard. Farmers discover that imported wheat arrives faster than payments for their own. Artisans learn that Netherlandish cloth outcompetes domestic looms. Nobles cultivate honor as if it were a crop and harvest rents as if they were fruit. The crown discovers a seduction more powerful than conquest, borrowing against future treasure to buy present glory. Debasement begins not as a scandal, but as a convenience. If 5 coins can be made from the silver that used to make 4, the treasury reports a miracle. Markets hear a translation. More counters chasing the same goods. Prices edge. Then increase. Then sprint. Creditors shorten maturities. Merchants demand a premium for time. The economy stops being a workshop and becomes a pipeline. Bullion flows in, luxury flows out, productive capacity withers, and a sovereign rich in metal becomes poor in industry. The mines falter. The mint keeps humming. That gap is where sovereign risk metastasizes into national habit. Why does a society choose the ease of imports over the grind of innovation? Because easy money makes hard choices look optional. Because political prestige attaches to fleets and palaces, not to lathe upgrades and crop rotations. Because aristocratic status despises repetitive labor while admiring spectacular expense. Because a generation raised on bullion forgets how slow capital is to grow when it is planted in the soil rather than poured from a ship. And because debt retells every difficulty as a scheduling problem. Pay later, parade now. Shift the scene to Britain and the tempo changes. Less gold in hand, more credibility in contract. London becomes a lighthouse that signals safety through fog. Rule of law, enforceable claims, a currency lashed to metal. The world stores its savings in sterling and calls it prudence. This is soft power at its apex. Rent the world using promises the world prefers over anyone else's cash. The system works. Until war asks a question credibility alone can't answer. Wars must be prepaid. The gold anchor strains. The fiscal hall creaks. Leaders pick between defending a parity that flatters memory or defending an economy that needs air. For a while they try to do both. The results are predictable. Exports suffocate under an overvalued pound. Unemployment blooms. Rates stay high to protect the myth. And each year, the maintenance cost of empire rises faster than the capacity to pay it. Britain's decline is not a cliff, but a staircase. Each step is labeled in polite language. Adjustment, preference, devaluation, convertibility episode, crisis managed, confidence restored. Each step gives back a slice of privilege. Central banks nudge reserves toward the dollar. Invoices add a second currency line. Financing terms ask, quietly at first, for a spread over what London once got for free. The city keeps its role as a marketplace. The crown loses its role as a monetary axis. You don't notice the day the world stops needing your money. You notice 10 years later when that need is no longer the default. The Soviet story is louder in symbols and quieter in spreadsheets. Here the problem isn't frivolous consumption. It's the murder of signals. Prices are commands, not conversations. Managers obey output quotas and ignore demand. Wages buy cues in shadow markets. Hard currency from oil and gas papers over design flaws. When energy prices fall, the paper thins. The ruble remains an internal fiction and an external punchline. Dollars and Deutschmarks do the heavy lifting whenever something must be truly bought. Tanks and rockets enforce borders. They cannot enforce trust in a currency nobody outside wants and many inside distrust. Then one wall collapses, and the rest happens with a speed that only looks like magic to those who haven't watched the balance sheets. No foreign army invades. Accountancy does. Three arcs give one refrain. Resource, reach, or raw force cannot substitute for balance between promises and productivity. Money is a claim on goods and labor. Debt is a claim on future money. When claims outrun creation, societies choose a coping mechanism. They cheapen the claim, inflation. They restructure the promise, default. Or they surrender prestige, loss of reserve status, loss of empire. Often they taste all three. Debt is dangerous not because it's evil, but because it is persuasive. It tells a mayor he can fix a bridge without raising taxes. It tells a minister she can fund a war without finishing a reform. It tells a generation that a pension can be both generous and fully funded even as birth rates fall and productivity stalls. It tells truth for a while, that genuinely moves resources across time. Then the time value of money collects its fee. If borrowed years purchase productivity, the fee is affordable. If borrowed years purchased applause, the fee is crushing. The anatomy of collapse repeats enough to sketch. Ambition jumps ahead of income. Deficits move from cyclical to structural. The monetary anchor loosens sometimes by metallurgical tricks, sometimes by legal decree, sometimes by balance sheet sorcery that expands credit faster than real output. Inflation blurs price signals. Trust erodes quietly, then publicly. Reserve privilege leaks through a dozen capillaries. Bilateral trade in other units. Commodity contracts dented with alternatives. Reserve managers diversifying because careers punish concentration more than they reward conviction. Finally, a reset. New rules, new anchors, new yardsticks. No calendar marks the day. The signal is a slow inversion. The burden of proof flips from why not hold our currency to why take the risk. You don't live in macro. You live in terms and invoices. The signs you can feel arrive as policy footnotes and contract edits. Why do leaders who read history reenact its mistakes? Because political systems reward the short run and punish the long run. Because seigniorage acts like sugar. Fast energy now, quiet damage later. Because interest expense doesn't protest until it does, at which point it's the largest line item you can't cut. Because optimism is a civic virtue right up until it is a fiscal vice. Because each generation believes it has discovered a way to outgrow arithmetic. Gold re-enters here, not as savior, but as witness. It is the yardstick that refuses to stretch. In good times it's mocked as relic. In bad times it's needed as denominator. It offers no cash flow and no productivity by itself, but it does one thing with perfect reliability. It does not depend on anyone else's promise to exist tomorrow. In monetary weather, that single attribute turns from trivial to decisive. There is a way out, but it isn't theatrical. Reduce structural deficits before markets reduce them for you. Make real rates positive and credible long enough to rebuild savings habits. Lengthen average maturity so rollover risk doesn't turn a liquidity squall into a solvency storm. Spend where the multiplier survives contact with reality. Skills that raise output per hour. Infrastructure that shortens supply lines and widens bottlenecks. Signs tethered to markets rather than press releases. Let prices talk again, even when you dislike what they say. None of this earns applause in the quarter it begins. All of it earns breathing room in the decade it continues. Soft power of money deserves its own lens. When your unit is the yardstick, you buy the world's output with IOUs of your own design. The privilege is real and deserved when it reflects credible institutions and productive capacity. But the yardstick is held steady by two hands. One is domestic discipline. The other is global usefulness. If the first hand trembles rising interest cost share, shorter debt tenors, gimmicks over governance, the world notices. If the second releases a finger more regional settlement systems, more gold on central bank balance sheets, more invoices written in alternatives, privilege bleeds. The day reserve becomes preferred sometimes is not a day on the calendar. It's a long, quiet shrug. False dawns are part of every chapter. Inflation prints cool for a few quarters. Equity indices climb. Borrowing costs ebb. Economists say, soft landing. Maybe. The test is dull and strict. Are real rates durably positive without strangling output? Is interest expense shrinking as a share of revenue? Are new issues extending tenor without coercion? Have reserve managers stopped diversifying? If not, you're smelling anesthetic, not healing. A micro ear can hear macro breath. Negative real yields teach savers to leave. Shortening maturities reveal timeline fear. Widening physical premia reveal distrust of paper claims. High nominal rates paired with sticky core inflation reveal a rising real cost of capital, the single magnet strong enough to pull deferred consumption back into savings. These are not mysteries. They are behaviors in search of incentives strong enough to reverse them. New rails, digital ledgers, instant settlement, tokenized claims change frictions, not fundamentals. Better roads don't change where the mountains are. In money, the mountains are productivity and trust. If rails are sleek but trains haul promises that cannot be met, the destination stays the same. If rails are old but trains haul goods people want at prices signals discovered, the journey is slower but safer. Reread Spain through productivity. Bullion bought present luxuries instead of future factories. Reread Britain through productivity. Credibility financed wars faster than industry could regenerate itself. Reread the USSR through productivity. Command suppressed signals until the system ran out of oxygen. Productivity is the center of gravity. Move it and the orbit changes. Ignore it and orbits decay. What keeps a nation upright when headwinds turn to crosswinds? Institutions that restrain exuberance in booms and cushion pain in busts. Fiscal frameworks that define structural and force policy to respect it. Central banks independent not by decree but by doctrine. Political coalitions that can lose face without losing nerve. An ecosystem where inventors out-earn influencers, where builders outlast rhetoricians, where accounting beats announcement. At the household and corporate level, the playbook rhymes. Don't wait for a press conference to announce a reset. Read the contracts on your desk. If supplier terms harden, if clients demand shorter price locks, if partners propose dual currency escrow, if insurers push riders you never saw before, the weather changed. Hedge the time you cannot control. Own assets whose cash flows survive repricing. Avoid balance sheets that depend on permanent cheap money. Keep optionality where bureaucracies cannot ration it. Spain had silver and forgot factories. Britain had empire and forgot renewal. The USSR had nukes and forgot signals. None survived debt is shorthand. More precise is this: none survived the choice to make debt the plot rather than the prop. When productivity is the plot, debt is a tool, and money is a measure. When debt is the plot, productivity becomes an afterthought, and money becomes a costume. Costumes win applause. Plots decide endings. If today's headlines feel eerily familiar, they are. Cheap money stretches, cheap debt tempts, asset prices levitate, productivity lags, and then promises are repriced. The costume changes each generation. The choreography, exuberance, denial, repricing, reform is stubborn. The variable is discipline, not the stern face at a podium, but the willingness to trade applause now for capabilities later. The oldest accountant in history does not sleep. It charges interest on time. It recognizes revenue when earned, not when announced. It writes down assets when their cash flows fail, no matter what the brochure said. It is unimpressed by parades and unmoved by slogans. It credits nations that turn surpluses into compounding productivity and debits nations that turn deficits into compounding excuses. There is a gentler ending available. It looks boring on camera and heroic in hindsight. Leaders tell voters the truth about arithmetic. Voters reward leaders who decline to buy applause with debt. Institutions anchor policy to rules that are transparent and hard to game. Capital is priced by markets that are free enough to punish fads and patient enough to reward compounding. Productivity, not pageantry, takes the main stage. And the national story becomes less cinematic but more durable. Fewer cliffhangers, more chapters. The refrain bears repeating until it becomes muscle memory. Spain had silver. Britain had empire. The USSR had nukes. None survived debt once debt stopped buying time and started buying denial. Choose the plot, and the props will serve it. Choose the prop, and the plot will consume you. If this analysis helped you see the quiet signals beneath the loud news, stay with the channel. We read history not to predict fireworks, but to track the equations that outlive headlines. We decode contracts and balance sheets not to scare you, but to give you the tools to separate anesthetic from cure, myth from mechanism, costume from plot. Subscribe, not for certainty, but for clarity, because empires don't fall in a day. They drift for years, and those who learn to read the wind don't have to learn the hard way.